Marcus Ellington was 39 years old when his wife handed her attorney a list of assets she believed represented everything her husband had ever built. He drove a 7-year-old work truck with a cracked dashboard clip he had never gotten around to fixing. He brought his lunch in a Navy thermal cooler. Her friends from her marketing firm called him Quiet Marcus, and Simone laughed when they did, and never once corrected them. She had spent 14 months building her exit with the same precision she used to arrange everything in her life, carefully, with an eye toward presentation and very little concern for the foundation beneath. She did not know about the trust. She did not know about the 3 commercial properties held under Ellington Holdings, LLC, or the quarterly rent revenue those properties generated, or the way Marcus had structured ownership through a family vehicle his grandfather had established in 1988, 7 years before Marcus had ever met her, and 15 years before the thought of divorce had entered either of their minds. She did not know that the $3.4 million her husband had quietly grown through reinvested revenue and 2 precisely timed acquisitions would not appear on the joint financial disclosures she had spent 6 weeks preparing, because it had never, not once, been joint. What Simone had no idea, not in 14 months of careful planning, was whose name appeared on the other side of that mediation table. And when Kenneth Peel, the most self-assured divorce attorney in Mecklenburg County, opened the respondent's disclosure folder and read the name printed at the top, the smile he had carried into that conference room like a personal accessory did not survive the first sentence. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning Simone filed the papers, Marcus did not yet know. He was in the kitchen at 6:30, running a grout sponge along the backsplash he had installed himself over a long April weekend 3 years back. The pattern was small white and gray hexagons. Nothing expensive. Nothing decorative beyond what was necessary. And his grandfather would have called it sound work. The joints were clean. The corners were flush. The whole thing had been laid with a level and a patience that most men Marcus knew didn't have the temperament to maintain. His grandfather, Ellis Ellington, had spent 31 years as a licensed masonry contractor in Gastonia, North Carolina. He never owned more than 2 pairs of dress shoes at one time. But he had owned property, quiet, documented, titled, protected, since 1974. When he passed, he left Marcus 3 things: a worn carpenter's square, a handwritten letter, and a family trust administered by an attorney who had moved all documents to Charlotte in 2003 at Marcus's request. Ellis's exact words about the work were the ones Marcus had committed to memory and never felt the need to share with anyone. Build the thing right, and the storm can't touch it. Build it for yourself, and the wind don't care who's watching. Marcus had built it right. He was a structural engineer by credential, a senior project manager by title at a mid-sized Charlotte engineering firm, and a property owner by inheritance and careful intention, in that order, and never in that order publicly. He wore steel-toed boots to the office and a hard hat on job sites, and drove his truck to a firm where his name appeared on no marquee. What his principals knew about him was that he solved load-bearing problems that made other engineers reluctant, and that he came in under budget with a consistency that bordered on embarrassing. What they did not know, what no one at that firm knew, was what Ellington Holdings, LLC held, or what it was worth, or how Marcus had grown it across 11 years through reinvested revenue and 2 deliberately timed acquisitions in Charlotte neighborhoods that weren't fashionable when he bought in. He met Simone in the Noda neighborhood at a fundraiser for a literacy foundation when she was 29 and he was 28. She was wearing a dark green dress and asking sharper questions than anyone else at the table. questions that pressed the nonprofit's program director on data and accountability with a precision that impressed Marcus before she ever turned to speak to him. She was in marketing strategy. She read novels and talked about them with specific opinions. She laughed easily and then said something smarter in the same breath. For 3 years, what they had together was genuine. For 2 more after that, the genuine part began to thin in ways Marcus noticed but assigned to reasonable causes. A promotion that stretched her hours. A stadium project that consumed his evenings. The natural compression of a life that was simply very full. He had not recognized the thinning for what it was. Not yet. He noticed smaller things over time, the way a structural engineer notices hairline cracks before he understands their pattern. A perfume she hadn't mentioned buying, present one morning with no explanation offered. A text she angled away from him at the dinner table 2 Tuesdays in a row, with her thumb covering the preview. A phone she began taking upstairs when she went to shower, which she had never done before. He noted each one with the detached precision of a man trained to observe what was present before deciding what it meant. On his encrypted laptop partition, behind a password Simone had never asked about, sat a folder he had named El Trust. Inside it were 11 years of organized documents, incorporation papers, property deeds, trust amendments, quarterly statements, and correspondence with a firm on South Tryon Street that specialized in what their letterhead described simply as family wealth structure and asset protection. She had never once asked about that folder. In 7 years of marriage, she had never asked about a lot of things. The certified mail notification arrived at 7:12 that morning, just as Marcus poured her coffee and left it on the counter. He read the sender. Mecklenburg County Clerk of Court. He set his phone down on the clean tile countertop. He picked up his own coffee. He drank it slowly. He did not open the envelope that morning. He signed for it when the carrier arrived at noon, placed it on his desk in the spare room he used as a home office, and finished the load-bearing calculations he owed his project lead by end of business. He sent the file at 4:17. He closed his laptop. Then he opened the envelope and read all 22 pages of the petition for dissolution of marriage, including the exhibits. Simone had cited irreconcilable differences. She had listed the joint checking account with its current balance of $4,312. She had listed the house, which carried a remaining mortgage of $200 and $4,000. She had listed his employer-sponsored 401k, holding $67,000 in index funds. She had listed what her attorney described, with confident brevity, as all jointly held marital assets. There was no mention of Ellington Holdings. There was no mention of the trust. There was no mention of the 3 commercial properties, 2 in East Charlotte, and 1 in the Noda neighborhood, where Marcus had first seen her in a green dress, asking precise questions 11 years ago at a fundraising table. There was also no mention of Derek Trask. Marcus had known that name for 4 months. He had seen it first on a credit card statement that arrived addressed to Simone at an address she had not updated. He had placed it on her desk without comment. He had seen it again in a contact entry on her phone, screen up on the kitchen island for 9 minutes while she was upstairs. He had not opened the contact. He had photographed the screen and moved on. His hands did not shake. He went to his encrypted partition. He opened a new subfolder inside El Trust. He named it Simone. Then he worked backward. He pulled every joint bank statement from the last 18 months. He pulled the property management logs for each of the 3 commercial units. He pulled the joint credit card statements and organized them by date. He cross-referenced everything methodically, the way he cross-referenced structural load calculations, starting at the foundation, not the surface. What he found took him until 2 in the morning. In 15 months, $6,800 had been moved from the joint checking account and amounts carefully calibrated to stay below automatic alert thresholds. Nothing over 500 in a single transfer. He counted 14 separate transactions. When he overlaid those dates against the joint credit card records, 11 of them fell within 48 hours of hotel charges in Asheville and Charleston. Trips Simone had described to him as work travel with a colleague named Patricia. Marcus had not questioned it at the time. He had noted, separately, that her firm's published employee directory listed no one by that name, and he had filed that note away without comment. The property management logs surfaced something else. Unit 3B in the Noda Commercial Building, 1,200 square feet on the second floor. Leased 18 months prior to a business called Trask Realty Group, LLC, had been 4 months behind on rent. Marcus had flagged the delinquency to the property manager without particular interest. Now he pulled the original leasing documents. Derek Trask had signed them. Ellington Holdings had accepted 18 months of payments from the man who had been in his wife's phone as something other than a colleague. Derek Trask had been unknowingly writing rent checks to Marcus Ellington's company for a year and a half, sitting daily in a building that Ellis Ellington had purchased in 1991 and that Marcus's family had held for 33 years. Marcus considered that fact for exactly 4 seconds. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined everything he did in rooms where the stakes were real. He organized the Simone folder by date. 64 files, clearly labeled. He opened his contacts and scrolled to Brenda Hollis-esque at the South Tryon firm he had worked with since the first trust amendment in 2014. She answered on the second ring. "Brenda," he said. "It's Marcus Ellington, the personal matter I flagged last year. I need you to open that file." A pause, a keyboard. "Then I'll send the secure upload link. Send everything you have." 64 files, he said. "I'll send them tonight." "Marcus." Her voice was unchanged. "How thorough is the documentation?" He looked at the screen. "Thorough," he said. He ended the call and went back to work. Some things, his grandfather had taught him, you don't rush. You build them right. And you build them to last. Brenda Hollis had practiced family law and asset litigation in Charlotte for 26 years. She did not maintain social media. She did not seek press. What she maintained was a reputation that moved through the legal community the way certain structural elements move through a building, invisible until tested. At which point you understood they had been holding everything together the entire time. She reviewed Marcus's 64 files in 48 hours. When he sat across from her 3 days after the initial call, in her 4th-floor corner office with its view of South Tryon Street, she had the materials organized in a red accordion folder and a yellow legal pad with 2 neat columns of handwritten notes. "The trust is clean," she said, without preamble. "It predates the marriage by 7 years and holds assets your wife had no legal interest in at inception. No North Carolina judge will fold it into the marital estate. That is not a risk. It is a settled question." She tapped the second column. "The transfers are more useful. 14 transactions, consistently below $500, patterned against travel records she charged to your joint card. In isolation, any one of those is explainable. In sequence, across 15 months, they constitute a documented pattern of dissipation of marital assets. That becomes a counterclaim." "And the lease?" Marcus said. Brenda allowed herself a quarter of a smile. "The fact that Mr. Trask has been paying rent to your holding company without his knowledge is not directly material to the dissolution proceedings." She paused. "It is, however, clarifying in ways that I find professionally satisfying." She slid a single page across the desk. This is the asset disclosure we'll be filing on your behalf. Once Peel's office reads this document, his entire strategic framework for this case becomes obsolete. He has built his offer around a joint account and a mortgaged house. He has no framework for what I am about to hand him. Marcus read the page. He signed it. Real power, he had come to understand a long time ago, operated in quiet rooms. He drove to Gastonia on a Saturday, past exits he had taken since childhood, through a landscape that looked the same as it always had even when everything around it had shifted. His great-uncle Raymond was 74 years old and lived in the same house his brother Ellis had built by hand in 1968. Raymond Ellington had been present the day the trust was first drafted. He had co-signed the initial incorporation documents. He had watched Marcus's grandfather lay the legal groundwork for something he called permanent, and he had never doubted that the word applied. Raymond poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat at the kitchen table and listened without interruption while Marcus explained the situation with the economy it deserved. She thought she was walking away with half of a modest man's modest life, Raymond said, when Marcus finished. That's what it looked like from the outside, Marcus said. Raymond was quiet. He turned his glass in one hand. Your grandfather used to say, the deeper you lay the foundation, the longer it takes for a man to realize he's standing on yours. He looked across the table. She never once asked what you were building. Did she? It wasn't a question. No, Marcus said. She never did. Raymond stood and retrieved the fireproof lockbox from the hall closet and set it on the table between them. Inside it, in manila envelopes organized by year, were documents going back to 1988. And inside those was a detail Marcus had not fully registered in years, the Noda property. The one Derek Trask had been leasing had been purchased by Ellis Ellington in 1991, transferred into the trust upon his death, and held in Ellington Holdings without interruption since. The building where Derek Trask worked every day, where he reviewed his listings and ran his numbers and imagined his future, had been in Marcus's family for 33 years. He had been a tenant in the Ellington estate without knowing it, and without ever once thinking to find out. Marcus drove back to Charlotte with the lockbox on his passenger seat and the radio off. The forensic accountant Brenda retained was a man named Gerald who communicated exclusively by encrypted email and spoke in the measured language of verified facts. What Gerald surfaced about Derek Trask was this: 2 commercial loans in arrears, a business credit line drawn to $84,000, and a civil dispute with a former business partner that had been filed in Mecklenburg County 7 months prior and was not trending in Trask's favor. The successful developer Simone had built her future around was a presentation being held together by leverage, optimism, and a floor that was softer than it appeared. What Gerald found about Simone was different in kind. 14 expense reimbursements from her employer, filed over 16 months and totaling $11,200. That corresponded to no client-facing marketing work in the company's project records. The dates matched the Asheville and Charleston trips precisely. The employer had not yet been notified. Brenda flagged it and held it in reserve. Preparation, Marcus knew, was the work. The reckoning was only the ceremony. On a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after he had first called Brenda, Marcus came home, changed out of his work clothes, and made pasta. He boiled the water. He set the table with the same quiet attention he always had. 2 placemats, 2 glasses, salt and pepper where they always were. When Simone came downstairs still carrying her work bag, he asked how her day had been. She said fine. He said good. She checked her phone twice during dinner and kept it face down between checks. He did not check his at all. After dinner she loaded the dishwasher and he wiped down the counters, and she said she had work calls to review. He said he understood. He turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, looking at the white and gray, hexagonal backsplash in the ambient light from the street. She had no idea he had already made 11 copies of everything she had handed him reason to document. Tools were meant to work, not shine. The mediation hearing was set for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in the offices of Peel & Associates, 8 floors above College Street in a building Marcus had helped site certify in 2019. He had noted the coincidence when the location was proposed by Simone's attorney. He had not mentioned it to Brenda. He simply said the location was acceptable. Kenneth Peel was 52 years old and had practiced family law in Charlotte for 23 years. He carried the particular ease of a man who had reviewed the opposing party's financial disclosure and found it modest. He arrived in a navy suit with Simone at his elbow, set his folder on the conference table, and made unhurried small talk with the mediator in the manner of a man who considered the outcome already in hand. He had not yet opened Marcus's disclosure. Brenda Hollis walked in at 8:58. Peel looked at her. Then he looked at Marcus, at the work boots, the jacket, the quiet man across the table who had driven a 7-year-old truck to a hearing that Peel had expected to close in under an hour, and then back at Brenda. Marcus watched the calculation run behind his eyes and come up short. "Good morning, Kenneth," Brenda said, and set her folder on the table without ceremony. The mediator called them to order. Peel presented his initial offer, which was built on confident, incorrect math. The marital home split by equity. The 401k divided at 30%. The joint account split evenly. The tone of his presentation was the tone of a man reading from a script he expected to end in signatures within the hour. Brenda waited until he finished. Then she opened her folder. The first document she slid across the table was the Ellington Family Trust, established 1988, amended in 1997, and again in 2014, a non-marital protected asset under North Carolina law, predating the marriage by 7 years and predating any joint financial arrangement Marcus and Simone had ever entered. She slid a second document beside it. Ellington Holdings, LLC. 3 commercial properties in Mecklenburg County. Current appraised value, $3,420,000. Sole member and manager, Marcus L. Ellington. Kenneth Peel picked up the second document. He read it. He read it again. The color in his face changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window in winter. Not dramatic, not loud, just a cold awareness settling into every corner at once. Brenda continued. The third document, 14 unauthorized transfers from the joint checking account over 15 months, totaling $6,800, accompanied by a date mapped overlay against joint credit card charges for travel occurring within 48 hours of each transfer. A pattern. A documented one. The fourth document. The forensic summary of expense reimbursements totaling $11,200, drawn from Simone's employer against client codes that matched no active accounts. A letter from Brenda's office to the company's HR department, date stamped 4 days prior, was clipped to the back. Simone's hand on the table went very still. Brenda set down a fifth document without pausing. The commercial leasing agreement for Unit 3B in a NODA building on a block Marcus's grandfather had purchased in 1991. Tenant, Trask Realty Group, LLC. Landlord of record through the property management firm, Ellington Holdings, LLC. 18 months of rent receipts, all accepted. Peel set down the papers he was holding. For the first time that morning, he had nothing to say. "You own the building he's been renting?" he said finally. He said it to the room. "Among others," Brenda said. "The trust has held that particular property for 33 years. The room was quiet in a way that pressed against the walls. Simone turned to Marcus. Her voice, when it came, was carefully modulated. The voice she used when something wasn't working and she was still searching for the angle that would work. Marcus, we don't have to let this become what it's becoming. We can still. The counterclaim has been filed, Brenda said. The employer notification has been sent. The lease on Unit 3B will not be renewed. She folded her hands on the table. There is no negotiating surface remaining. Peel looked at Simone. It was not the look of a partner. Marcus stood. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket, the way his grandfather had always done before leaving any room that mattered, a small, deliberate signal that the work here was complete. He picked up his copy of the folder. He looked at Simone across the table. You spent 14 months preparing to walk away with half of a modest man's modest life, he said. His voice did not rise above the level of ordinary conversation. The modesty was a structure. Like everything I build, you never thought to ask what was underneath it. He nodded once to the mediator. He walked out. The elevator was waiting. He rode it down 8 floors in silence. In the lobby, through the glass, Charlotte was doing what Charlotte did on a Thursday morning, moving, building, carrying on, without commentary. He stood in the lobby for a moment and watched it. He was done. 8 months passed like water. Marcus sat on the cedar deck he had built board by board off the back of a Plaza Midwood bungalow he had purchased in November and renovated across the winter, evenings and weekends, with a playlist Raymond had put together for him, and a thermal cooler on the floor, and the particular focused silence he did his best thinking inside. The deck was sealed against weather and level to the 10th of an inch and would outlast the mortgage on the house by decades. Below it, in a garden bed he had turned himself, a Japanese maple he had planted in March was holding a deep wine red that caught the early light and seemed, at certain angles, to generate its own warmth from within. He sat with his coffee and watched the morning come in over the roofline. Celeste arrived on Saturday mornings. She was an architect who specialized in adaptive reuse. Old textile mills, abandoned schools, buildings that other people had already written off as lost causes. And she had a habit of seeing value at angles that most people walked right past. She asked good questions and didn't perform when she didn't know an answer, which Marcus had found, in his experience, to be rarer than it had any right to be. She had brought him a bag of beans from an Asheville roaster 6 weeks in and said simply, "I think you'll like this one." And she had been right. And he had not needed to explain why that kind of quiet accuracy mattered to him. She understood the language without being asked to learn it. Ellington Holdings had signed a commercial development contract in May. 280,000 square feet in a mixed-use corridor in East Charlotte. The contract was worth $2.1 million across 3 years. It required Marcus to bring in a partner for the first time, something he had done without complication, because the foundation of that arrangement was mutual respect and nothing else. Gerald had proposed a secondary trust vehicle to anchor the new revenue stream. Marcus had agreed. He heard about Simone through her sister, who called once in April, not to mediate, not to argue, but simply to say she was sorry, and that she had been watching the situation for longer than Marcus knew, and that she hoped he was well. Simone had been placed on administrative leave within 2 weeks of Brenda's employer notification, and had resigned before the internal investigation concluded. She was managing a boutique retail shop in South Park now, in a strip of storefronts adjacent to a parking deck. Derek Trask's lease on Unit 3B had not been renewed. Trask Realty Group had relocated to a smaller market in Greensboro. The civil dispute with his former partner had not resolved in his favor. Simone's mother no longer returned her calls. Marcus registered all of this the way you register a weather report for a city you no longer live in. He set his coffee mug on the cedar railing and watched a red-winged blackbird settle briefly into the Japanese maple before lifting off again toward the roofline. The city was waking up around him. Somewhere down the block, a circular saw started up. A clean, purposeful sound. Someone building something on a Saturday morning, because it needed to be built. He had built everything worth keeping, and he was free. And he was solvent. And he was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.